podcast is recorded in Dharawal country. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Hello, hooligans. Welcome to the last day of 2020. Whoa! How did that even happen? Isn't it still March? All right, so update on yesterday's podcast. The New South Wales Police have interviewed Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, about his actions when he travelled through several different COVID danger zones to ride his bike to a cafe. They decided that despite the fact he was breaking the restrictions as they were written, he wasn't breaking the restrictions because he was riding a bike. I think that was it, exercising. So apparently you're allowed to break those restrictions if you're exercising, people, according to the Assistant Minister, Police Commissioner in New South Wales. Exercising means you're not breaking the restrictions. That was today's press conference. All right, so today I've decided it's the last day of the year for 2020. This has been a year where lots of experts have been ignored and discredited in a lot of cases. So, on the topic of the current COVID outbreak in New South Wales, we're just going to do some listening to the experts, right? Okay, because the problem here is that Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier of New South Wales, and Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, both have these experts. They're pet experts. We've got the Chief Health Officer in New South Wales, and we've got the Chief Medical Officer in Australia. And both of these people provide the expert advice which our leaders base their decisions on. And in both of these cases, I feel yesterday our Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, Scott Morrison's pet health advisor, said he's all for the cricket to go ahead. He wouldn't take his elderly grandparents, but he's all for it. So that's one Chief Health Medical Officer who's saying what needs to be said. Scott Morrison's still completely absent, sent Paul Kelly instead. And of course, we've got poor Kerry Chan in New South Wales. Now, I'm still... body language in the presser. Gladys was hiding today. They'd moved the SBS camera so that Gladys was mostly behind the translator during times when Kerry was talking. I know you're listening, Gladys, because every day you react to what I say. All right, so we've got... These two women are in a very strange relationship. Up until yesterday, as I noted, Kerry Chant had been wearing a mask to every single press conference. Do you know who wasn't wearing a mask today? Kerry Chant. Weird. It's almost like she's putting her own concerns aside to look like she's backing up Gladys. Right, so our experts, the expert advice that is being used to determine whether or not stupid, ridiculous stuff in New South Wales will go ahead, like fireworks and cricket matches and theatre performances. So these experts are the ones advising us, but unfortunately when it comes to our Chief Health Officer and our Chief Medical Officer, we cannot trust these people as experts because their expertise is filtered to us through the expectations of our state and federal leaders. So the people who actually have the power here in this situation is not the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Health Officer. We are ignoring the experts. You can see it in their faces. So the people who have the power here is Gladys Berejiklian and Scott Morrison. Oh, except that now we've exported it to Victoria, haven't we? How interesting. We can have a death match where... Oh, death match is the wrong word. Well, New South Wales and Victoria can gently compete to see who's better at handling an outbreak, hey? Okay, so... Both of these our state and federal leader, Gladys Berejiklian and Scott Morrison, both have governments with proven corruption existing at all levels of the government. They both have ties that we know about and ties that we don't know about to big business entities. Gladys's ex-boyfriend now, I assume, was the one selling access to the Premier for enough of a payment. And they both have a dead set determination not to shut down the economy in New South Wales. Now, for people overseas, I know it sounds kind of weird that Scott Morrison gets to have a say in what happens in this state with him being like the federal leader, but he lives just around the corner. Bit of a wanker, but that's all right. No, it's not. We elected him. Dear God. Okay, so we've got these two people who are, to them, it is much more important to keep the economy going. Oh, and protect patient zero. Listened to yesterday. But at the same time, we cannot forget those photos we saw during the fires. You know, the ones with Scotty and Gladys was cowering away from Scott Morrison. In the background, we had Shane Fitzgerald, who was then the head of the RFS, the Royal Rural Fire Service. So we saw that photo with Scott and Gladys, and it was so obvious, the body language, that he had just finished bullying the fuck out of her. And we know there's a pre-existing bully relationship here between Scott Morrison and Gladys Berejiklian. Like I keep saying, she wants to be on the front bench in the federals, and she's proving, like women have to do in politics, that she will do anything to get there. So ScoMo basically sets the agenda in New South Wales. He is the reason we don't have a mask mandate or a lockdown or any of those things. But that's a little too simplistic, isn't it? Because realistically, we all know this is the Liberal National Party. Actually, this is Australia's two-party preferred system. Whoever is in power is the hand puppet of a number of wealthy individuals who get extra access to the political infrastructure because of their wealth. So we know for sure that Scott Morrison's decisions on what to do Gladys Berejiklian's decisions, as influenced by the experts' opinions and Scott Morrison's expectations, are entirely being moved by like the Murdoch media and Louis and Pratt and these billionaires who sit around Sydney getting handouts and treats. So the problem is that they're gagging the experts and not letting them speak. So that's a gross misuse of power. So today I've decided, let's just listen to some experts, hey? So we're not going very far back in history. The furthest we go back here is the 18th of December. But that's where we're going to start off. So back on the 18th of December, we had a small outbreak on the northern beaches. That's what we had. I'm going to play you some of a video by Dr Norman Swan, who is a very smart person, a scientist who is running a CoronaCast podcast, which is very popular. We trust Dr. Norman Swan. On the 18th of January, this is the expert advice given by Norman Swan.
At a minimum, there should be mandated mask wearing. So a lot of people are wearing masks on the northern beaches, but that probably only gets you to 40 or 50%. We get to nearly 100% if you mandated masks. I had the mayor on Radio National Breakfast this morning, and he supported mandated masking. I mean, that's a really cheap, effective thing to do that reduces transmission by up to 70%. Shouldn't be pleading for people to wear masks. You should just be saying that's the rule. Wear them. So lockdown is a different issue. So it depends on how much you're pulling people off the streets and off the roads. Luckily, it's a Friday, so going into the weekend, that you should be able to socially distance quite a lot. But people should not be going into other people's homes. Homes are high risk. Should be really careful about cafes and other things, and only going out when they have to. But you could, unusually here, you can lock down that area of Sydney. There's only 2 or 3 roads in, and you could actually ring fence it quite effectively, unlike, say, Broadmeadows in Melbourne, which is an amorphous suburb with lots of little streets going through it. It's very hard to lock down. You could lock down this area quite effectively, and it's pretty self-sufficient. So you could actually isolate it quite well. From the genomic testing, they should be able to have a reasonable idea which country it came from. There are variations between countries in terms of the strains circulating. There's a new strain circulating in the United Kingdom. They should be able to say with a reasonable degree of certainty, came from America, this came from Europe, this came from Britain. And that will give them an idea of where it might have come from in terms of overseas visitors, quarantine, or indeed aircrew. I mean, there's a lot of aircrew that live on those northern beaches. Modelling at the University of Sydney suggests every day that goes by when you've got spread equals a week at the other end. So I don't think you should expect this to really have been resolved by Christmas. If we're lucky, it will, but it's likely there's a long tail to it, and I suspect that at Christmas my prediction is for what it's worth, because again, I've got no inside information, is that at Christmas it won't be fully resolved. We'll still have cases then, but it'll be getting better. But I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon because of the number of cases. They'll know where they're coming from, but they've got to track them down. Christmas is a major super spreading event. So if there's virus circulating in New South Wales, Christmas is a real problem. And if it's got outside the northern suburbs, as it could have, quite easily.
All right, so what did he say? Every day that goes by equals a week at the end. That was the 18th of December, and today is the 31st of December. So we've been completely ignoring all of this expert advice. Gladys had access to that advice, but chose not to listen to it. Sydney did not go down into lockdown over Christmas. So you might remember back on my first Sydney has the COVID bubble has popped podcast. I started out with a quote from a woman called Raina McIntyre at the Kirby Institute, who was talking about the chance of Sydney becoming a super spreader event. So in that article further down, I didn't read it to you the other day, but Raina wrote, "If we do not act urgently, Christmas Day will be a super spreader, followed by the mother of all super spreading events, New Year's Eve. The exhausted New South Wales Public Health Team may begin 2021 with the largest COVID-19 epidemic the state has ever faced. The idea of living with a bit of COVID-19 and soldiering on is a falsehood because of the exponential growth of epidemic infections. The health system is the weak link. It is the first part of society to break during pandemics. When hospital and ICU beds are full, health workers dead, ill or quarantined, all other medical care becomes compromised. Even in the Ruby Princess related outbreak in Tasmania, more than 1,000 health workers were quarantined, forcing a hospital shutdown. Every city that has laboured under the misapprehension that it can carry on with a bit of community transmission has been forced into lockdown when the health system collapsed." That was in the Sydney Morning Herald. Gladys Berejiklian had access to that expert opinion, but she ignored it. So that was the 20th. What have we got here? The 26th, right? On the 26th, epidemiologist Mary-Louise McLaws, who is an epidemiologist who's worked with the WHO, said the New South Wales government has taken an emotive approach to restrictions because of the holiday period. She said, "I understand mental health. I understand that we were all really excited about the Christmas break. It's a time to come together. But this is also an accelerant time, New Year's Eve as well. We do not want an acceleration of the virus further into Greater Sydney. The way it is at the moment, we don't know how many more cases are incubating out there, so we don't want to add fuel to this potential fire." She said 3 days was not at all enough for authorities to assess the situation. She said if something happens on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, the minimum incubation period is around 5 or 6 days for people to start feeling symptoms, but it can be as long as 14. Gladys didn't listen to Professor McLaws either. Expert advice doesn't matter, does it? And so now we want to jump forward a bit. Let's go to, the 30th of December yesterday. Now we're talking about the cricket because, of course, Christmas went ahead. They opened up the northern beaches to allow visitors from outside of the northern beaches to go in there and visit people for Christmas and go back to their communities. New Year's Eve tonight is going ahead. The police are prepared for large crowds, even though people have been asked not to go out and watch the thing. And now we are talking about the cricket, which is starts on the 7th. So on the cricket, we are now at the stage. A couple of weeks ago, we had a single expert being quoted in each article. Now the ABC is now at the stage where they are asking every expert they can. So this is a kind of long bit of reading. This is from the ABC from an article yesterday called "Decision to Hold Third Test at Sydney Cricket Ground Sparks Controversy as COVID Cases Rise." Epidemiologist, so we're talking, I'm going to read you Gladys's response to all of this in a minute. Epidemiologist Mary-Louise McLaws from New South Wales believes spectators could still spread the virus because Gladys thinks cricket is safe. Frankly, even though you're outdoors for many hours, Professor McLaws said. There's a lot of shouting and laughing and joy. There's potential for super emission. It's good there could be some airflow, even a breeze, but you don't want to be downstream from that because that could put you at risk. While Professor McLaws believed the match should be called off, she said at the very least masks should be mandatory, including on public transport. A very blunt instrument that works very well is cancelling it while we have this uptick in numbers. If you're going to cancel, then masks need to be mandatory. And they then go on to quote Norman Swan, the host of the Radio National Health Report and Coronacast, who he was the one we were listening to on December 18, whose opinion about the Northern Beach was completely ignored. He said, the precautionary principle is to act fast, act early, and beg for forgiveness later, because there are no prizes for being late to this party. It's 5 days after Christmas, one incubation period after Christmas, so you'd expect a spike about now. That's a springboard for New Year's Eve as well. So the precautionary principle would be locking down Greater Sydney and really holding that for about 2 weeks. Those are just some of the expert opinions that are floating around out there. I will link all those on my Facebook page. So we need to then think about, of course, how our Premier, who is the hand puppet for Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, who is the hand puppet for all of those people who have money, Gladys has all of this expert opinion, but instead she's choosing to listen to the opinion of her Chief Health Officer, which has been filtered through all of those social responsibilities we know that Kerry Chan is also expected to think about. So, Gladys, in response to all of these experts, none of whom she has to acknowledge because they're just real world experts, not the one she hired, right? The one whose job she controls. Gladys said, the best health advice to us is that 50% capacity of that venue in an outdoor setting is safer than being in a household in a confined space. So outdoor settings, ticketed seating, controlled events are deemed to be safer than having too many people within a household. She thinks 25,000 people walking through the same tiny concrete hallways is safer than too many people in a house. So I listened to the press conference today, and you know I'll be there tomorrow because I just cannot help myself. And so we all know this is now a competition between Victoria and New South Wales because we reintroduced the bug down there, and we've got Queensland cheering on because we're stuck between two Labor states who, it's almost like we said lots of really horrible things about them lately, and now it's all payback time. So in attempting to defend New South Wales gold standard once again, and of course cover up for patient zero and protect the Northern Beaches, Gladys said, it's been evident during the course of the pandemic that every state leader, every territory leader has had their own policies in place. Every state and territory is different. Every government is different. Here in New South Wales, we always try and strike the right balance. This is a very unpredictable, contagious disease, but we also appreciate that we don't want to put more burdens on our citizens than we need to. It's a very fine line. At this stage of our response to the current outbreak, you will see a lot of volatility. Numbers will continue to bounce around as those close contacts in all likelihood start to develop the disease, and if they're in isolation, that's no cause for concern. But if, like the Croydon cluster, we can't identify the source of the infection, that is enormous cause for concern. Our approach in New South Wales is cautious, and we believe proportionate to the risk that's there. She's telling us to worry about the Croydon cluster because they can't identify the source of the infection, and yet New South Wales Health and the New South Wales Government are still collaborating to cover up who patient zero is. So, I don't know, Gladys, maybe it's time to start listening to some of the experts, because I heard a lot here from experts today, but do you know what I really heard? Norman Swan on the 18th of December, when this was a tiny outbreak on the northern beaches. Norman Swan said every day he's talking about lockdowns, every day that goes by equals a week at the end. So you've already earned us like a couple more months of this, Gladys. Maybe it's time to pull your finger out and start listening to the experts, eh? Yeah. All right. See you all tomorrow, party people. Sorry. See you next year. Yeah. Oh, how exciting. I wonder if we'll get invaded by aliens in 2021. Bye.